to be presenting on using Azure static websites. So that is going to be something that you're going to want to check out. It's going to be a fun presentation next month. So July 30th. And I just scheduled that on Meetup, so you can go sign up for that right now. Thank our sponsors. Thank you, Microsoft, for offering this space, which allows us to do hybrid meetings, which we're taking advantage of tonight. So Sam Nasr is our presenter, and he's, I'll mention this later, but he's presenting from, I keep wanting to say Chicago, but no, it's
Cleveland.
Cleveland, thank you. Yes, I knew that. So thank you to Microsoft for the space, and thank you also to Inferno Red, who has provided the pizza tonight. So they're a wonderful company. They're a small company that is somewhat local here. They're 100% work from home. They have a lot of mostly hire senior developers, but .NET developers and just kind of everything. They if you like working for largely commercial work, they're a great company to work with. Big fan. So I mentioned Van's talk on Azure static websites. The month after that, we're going to have Jeremy Sinclair come and give us an update on Windows on ARM. And I'm super excited for that because there's been, he presented maybe 2 years ago on Windows on ARM. And this is, I think a lot has changed since then. So this is going to be a really fun one. So yeah, how to participate. We got name tags if you're here in person. I see everyone's got them. Thank you for that. That helps. If you are attending virtually, please keep your camera off and mic off by default. Please use reactions. Everyone knows where the reactions are by now in Teams, right? That really helps the presenters to feel like engaged. If they make a joke and they get some kind of reaction, it really does help. So appreciate the use of reactions. Please use chat by default. Let's keep it family friendly, polite, and respectful. So we typically go out for beverages afterwards. If that sounds fun, we typically go over to the Makers Union Pub for the People, and they close usually within about half an hour to 45 minutes after when we arrive, which is just long enough for a little bit of hanging out, and that's kind of fun. So that's an option. And without further ado, Sam Nasr, our presenter tonight, he is a Microsoft MVP, and he has been doing software development for 20, 30 years, something like that, mostly Microsoft technologies. And he is a senior software engineer with NIS Technologies. And he is, I feel like he's everywhere doing everything. He's been so helpful to us here for this group, and we've had him a couple times in the past, and I'm so excited to have him again tonight. So go ahead and take it away, Sam. Thank you very much for presenting tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lee. Appreciate it. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And unfortunately, I'm not able to do so. Do I need permission? Or can he make me an organizer or presenter?
Okay, let me make sure that you voted.
Unverified.
Try again now.
All right. Excellent. Very good. So thanks again, Lee. Thanks to everyone for joining. A little bit about me. As Lee mentioned, my name is Sam Nasr. Been a software developer since 1995. I'm a senior software engineer for NIS Technologies. I have been certified with a few certifications from Microsoft. And two of my favorite things are running the Cleveland C# user group, as well as the Azure Cleveland user group. Both groups meet online, so feel free to join us. And all the meeting information is posted on meetup.com. In addition, I'm a technical author, and I've been a 6-time Microsoft MVP. A little shameless plug for the Cleveland C# user group. We meet monthly. The meetings are free of charge and open to the public. And essentially, everyone is welcome, whether you're a student or a hobbyist or a working professional. The meetings are open to everyone. We cover any and all topics related to .NET. And you can find all meeting information posted at meetup.com at the link listed at the bottom of the slide. So without further ado, let's dive into tonight's presentation about building your own Copilot. So before we get into that, let's first define what is Copilot. It is Microsoft's generative AI service. Basically, it allows you to create a conversational chat interface, and it is built on the OpenAI GPT-4 LLM or large language model. It was launched early last year in 2023. And it utilizes what's called the freemium model. So there's a free portion to it. However, if you want all the premium features, that's where the pricing starts to add in. Now, with Copilot, there's been a variety of flavors. We were first introduced to GitHub Copilot back in 2021, where basically, as you all know, you can incorporate it into Visual Studio and be able to get an interface where you can ask to have it explain a certain portion of code, or on the left-hand side, as you see circled in red, where you can essentially ask it to write a small segment of code. So seeing a working example of it, basically you would utilize the two slashes and you'd specify generate a function that retrieves database items by priority. And immediately it generates the code for you. Just as some stub code to get you as a starting point. So that was GitHub Copilot. Then Microsoft launched Copilot at Large, where basically it is a conversational chat. Essentially, it allows you to utilize search features, but it gives you that conversational aspect of it where you can have give and take with it, similar to as if you were talking to a normal human being. And so once they got into that, then essentially Copilot started to infiltrate a variety of different products. And as we see on this slide, it is not only used in the browser or in Visual Studio, but now it's infiltrated into Office, modern work, into data. So anything that we do on a day-to-day basis, whether I'm an information worker, I'm a software developer, or I'm an end consumer, I'm able to utilize the features of Copilot where I can have a chat with it, ask it a question, and carry on some type of a dialogue relating to specific data. And so with that said, as we see it infiltrating all the different aspects of our work life, as well as our own lives, then the question comes up, well, how about customizing a Copilot? Why would I want to do that? You'd want to do that so it's tailored to your own custom data for your own customers. You're going to be providing a deeper control over the user experience, meaning that if let's say that I'm an HVAC technician and I need a blower motor type Z, I may not be able to find that easily on Google or Amazon, and I have to do some searches and be able to filter through the content. But if I go to an HVAC distributor that has a customized Copilot and I say, give me blower motor type XYZ, immediately it comes up with the specific specs, as well as in-stock information, pricing, delivery, etc. So it's more customized for the user experience. And it focuses the response on the custom instructions that I give it. So if I'm asking for price, it gives me the price alone, as opposed to if I go into Google or Bing and search for it, again, I have to do all the filtering and sift through all the information that's being thrown at me. So in addition to providing all those features, I can add in additional skills using actions to be able to provide a more custom response. So what are the tools that are used for creating these various versions of Copilot? So for GitHub Copilot, I would go to github.com, where I can customize it with the settings. If I'm building it in Visual Studio Code, I can use the Teams toolkit to be able to build that. But if I want to create a custom Copilot where I can have conversational interaction, I can use either Copilot Studio or the new kid on the block, also known as Azure AI Studio. So the last two products are web-based, and we're going to focus mostly on the Azure AI Studio. So what is Azure AI Studio? It is a unified platform for developing and generative AI apps. It also allows me the ability to deploy these apps and use a test bed to be able to test them. It's web-based, as I mentioned, and it uses pre-built and customizable models, over 1,600 models to be exact. It allows the use of custom data where I can import my own data files and then tailor that experience for my own data. And because I'm using my own data, essentially it provides a custom experience for my end user. Now, if you'll notice that third bullet where we're utilizing over 1,600 different models, what that looks like is essentially we have 1674 to be exact. It comes from 14 different collections. And you see over on the far right, we have the different vendors and the providers for these different model collections. We have everything from Microsoft, OpenAI, Meta, et cetera, et cetera. Within that set, we have 26 inference tasks. So I can do things like, I can ask it to do text to image. I can ask it for text generation or forecasting or embeddings. So there's different models and I can actually specify which tasks I want to do. And then I can filter on that in the search bar. There's 11 fine-tuning tasks. And within the 1,600 different models, there are 21 different license structures. So I can pick and choose once I get into AI Studio, what license I want to follow, and it will show me all the different models that are available with that. And then last but not least, there are two different deployment types. So not all models can be deployed the same way. I can either use a serverless API, which is essentially a pay-as-you-go type of billing, or I can use the managed compute, where essentially I am providing the managed compute horsepower and then having more control over that model. So what are some prerequisites for getting started? As you might have guessed, because it's an Azure service, I do need an Azure subscription. In addition, I need to submit an application for OpenAI access, where I can utilize all of the different OpenAI features. And that usually, the turnaround time for that application could be anywhere from a couple hours to a couple days. Typically, in the past, it's been fairly quick. And then in addition, once I get started, I need to create a hub and a project, and we'll talk about those in more detail. And then I also need to leverage an Azure OpenAI more specifically for searching. So let me rephrase it. I need to leverage an OpenAI search service within Azure to be able to have it look at my data and then search through it. Once I have all those items in place, then I can utilize the Playground Quick Start, which is essentially a tutorial that will allow me to get to the point where I can utilize a playground or a sandbox for testing my model and making sure that it fits with my data and I'm getting the correct responses for all the prompts that I'm entering in. And then, as I mentioned, the Azure AI Search Service connection, where I am essentially connecting it to an Azure or an OpenAI search service, and it will index that data. And then last but not least, since it's custom Copilot, I need the sample product or my specific customer data to be imported. So with that, the best way to explain things, in my opinion, is always to go through a demo. And just a brief summary of what we're going to be doing. We're going to go through and create a hub and a project. We're going to connect to an Azure AI or OpenAI service. We're then going to create a deployment by choosing which specific model we want to deploy. And then we're going to open it in our playground or the test sandbox. Afterwards, we're going to add in our own custom data and then connect that to our resource group. And then last but not least, deploy the web or make a call to the API. Okay. So I hope you all memorized these 7 easy steps. And now we'll get into a demo. And for that, what I did is, because it's going to be on web-based, sometimes the latency is relatively slow. And that sometimes is not useful for a user group presentation. And so what I did was I captured the screen captions, and we'll be sharing those with you. And let me go ahead and enlarge it. So this is Azure AI Studio. It's accessed by going to ai.azure.com. And as you see, I've already created a demo project. And if I want to start and create a new one from scratch, I would essentially click on New Projects. And what this does is it prompts me for a project name and a hub. So the hub is essentially one centralized grouping mechanism. Think of it as a resource group in Azure, where I have one resource group and I can put in a web app, I can put in a database, I can utilize various things all within that resource group, and then I can share it. So anytime I create a new app inside that resource group, I immediately have access to all the different connections. The hub is very similar to that. And so I will be creating a project inside that hub. So let me go ahead and give it a new name.
Sam, do you mind zooming in just a little bit?
Sure. How's that?
That's great, thank you.
So if I'm going to be creating a new hub, which I won't, and the reason being there's a lot of latency and it takes time. So instead, I just want to show you what the screens would look like, but it's nothing really out of the ordinary as if I'm creating a new resource in an existing resource group, right? So it's going to ask me for my subscription, what resource group do I want to utilize for my hub, the location, and then the Azure OpenAI service, whether I'm going to be creating a new one or using an existing one. And then the same thing for the search service. And so I captured that in a Word document using the screen captions, again, just to facilitate the whole process and avoid the latency. So here for my demo hub, I specified the name of the hub, the subscription, resource group, etc. And then it gave me the ability to review, and it started creating them. And as you see, I got the clock next to 5 different items that are being created once I click the create project. And this was kind of a time-intensive process. So again, we're skipping that just by sharing the screen captions with you. And then once that's done, I now have a project that I can utilize. And this is a little gotcha that I should note. So even though it's been created, and as you see in the breadcrumb trail, it shows all projects, demo project 1, but then you look under here and it's blank. Sometimes you have to refresh the screen in order for that to appear within the browser. Then at that point, I'm ready to deploy my model. So I used a generic model, GPT-35 Turbo, and I left the content filter as default. Deployment type is standard, and I went ahead and deployed that. And once I deploy it, then I get an API key and an endpoint that I can use for my applications. Obviously, as you know, everything in Azure runs off of the API key and the endpoint, and the API key is essentially the keys to the kingdom. That's why I have that blanked out. Not that I don't trust you folks, but you know, it's just the good practice. So now let's get into it and see exactly what has been created. So let's cancel out of here. Let's go into my project. Actually, what I did was I created another tab. So if you notice through the breadcrumb trail, I'm in Demo Hub 1. I'm looking at all the projects and more specifically Demo Project 1. And once I get into that, you'll see over on the left-hand side that there is in the left pane, there is the chat option. Once I select that, this is essentially my sandbox where I can import data. So as you see under the tab, add your data. And here I brought in a product info file, which is a markdown file, and it already imported that. utilizing the resources that were set up in my resource group for the indexing and the searching. So this is a text file. Why did I choose 3.5 turbo? Good question. So it's been around for a while. It's free of charge, and it's an all-purpose type of model to utilize. There's, like I said, 1,600 different models that you can choose from, but essentially I could have chosen any other chat completion model to do the same thing here.
There's a
There
price
are
associated.
nuances.
Are there different prices associated with different models?
Mostly depending on usage, and yes, there are some pricing. Again, you have to maneuver the course. Some models there is a charge, others are free, and others are depending on usage. So it varies essentially.
What is the model?
What is the model?
Like, what is it?
It is a built by OpenAI, and it's a large language model for chat completion.
What would be the difference between that model and say another model? The data set.
Yeah, it's essentially a whole bunch of weights, right? So there's like billions of weights, and then based on how those weights were produced as a result of machine learning process, you have different quality of inference. So you use those weights when you do the inference, and it provides you, basically the prediction of an answer depending on how good those are trained or how specialized those weights are trained.
What other types of models besides chat are there available?
There are several others. Let me touch on that in just a little bit. Let me just get through the basics of getting into the customized Copilot. And then the second portion, we'll discuss the models in more detail. There's a question in chat. So as Labrina mentioned, different models trained and tuned differently. True, some allow for fine tuning. Again, let's talk about that in the second portion. Didn't they open up Azure AI Studio to everyone at Build? Yes, it's available. There are some features that are still in preview. As you can tell, the add your data, as you see here, it's in public preview. But essentially, it is available for use.
Do you still have to go through that application process and approval process and all that?
So that application process is for OpenAI models, and I touched on that in a previous slide. Let me dig it up real quick.
No big deal. I just thought, yeah, because that used to be a real pain to get in, and I was under the impression that you don't have to go through that anymore. I didn't. Sure.
For OpenAI access, you do need to fill out that application. And that was valid as of approximately a month ago. I'm pretty sure it still is active. And the link, yeah, so if I can share that with you. So the short link or the shortcut that I posted in the chat, which is this link, leads to this application that you fill out. It's about a dozen or so questions. And like I said, it takes anywhere between a couple hours to, typically it hasn't been more than a day from my experience, but they respond relatively quickly. Any other questions in chat that I may have missed? Let me take a quick peek.
I think that's it.
Okay, so where we left off was we said that we chose our deployment model. We imported the file product info, which is, as you see, is a markdown file. And what this is about is the Trail Walker hiking shoes. And it's got the various features of the boots, some technical specs, and some FAQs, some caution information, et cetera, et cetera. So that's specific to my product. Now, of course, I can import multiple files, but again, for keeping things simple, I just entered it in. I made it a simple demo, and we'll be utilizing that for the initial demo. So as you see, I asked, how much are the Trail Walker hiking shoes? And it came back with a price of 110 as it extracted it from the file. Again, in a very chat-friendly, human-friendly, user-friendly type of way, right? Now you'll notice that I have a system message, and this system message allows me to dictate how my chatbot will react to my users. So right now it's just set to be an AI assistant that helps people find information. But what if I change it to say, you are a rude AI assistant that helps people find information. Now, because I made a change to that system message, you'll see that the Apply Changes button is now enabled. So once I click that, click Continue, then I will ask it the same question. And as you can tell, I'm doing some cutting and pasting. So the first time I asked it, came back with the price is 110. I was expecting a different answer, so let me try it again. We paste it. Okay, let's try this.
Well, it's still deploying, so you need to wait a little bit.
Correct. Sorry, yes, my bad. I had missed that, but yes, it is deploying. In the past, though, it's been fairly quickly to accept the changes, so it's kind of a surprise. All right, so now I'm having additional dialogue with it, where I'm asking, are the shoes worth the money? And then it's pulling up some information out from the file that it imported, and it's telling me about based on customer reviews, et cetera, et cetera. All right, let me pause here and see if there's any questions.
So did you just make up the file you imported?
So that was a file that was open source that I had imported.
I mean, was there a specific structure to the file?
Not really. As I had showed you, it's basically a markdown file, and it's, as I have it opened up in Notepad, it's just broken down into a simple structure with the name of the product, some features, specs, and FAQs and cautionary information.
So we can just feed this text file?
Correct. So that's what I did. And if you recall, when we were importing it, let me backtrack. So as part of my setup process, I need to have an Azure OpenAI as well as a search service. And so those allow me to be able to read the file, index it, and be able to access the information within it. And the large language model helps to take my natural language question or prompt, be able to decipher that, extract the information from the file, and then likewise relay it back in a user-friendly manner.
So Jishnu asked, can the project be asked to crawl an external database like a ServiceNow or a SharePoint?
So ServiceNow, I don't think so. SharePoint, I don't believe so either, but I'm not certain. Let me make a note of that, and I can post the answer on my blog. But essentially, it's open to a variety of different file types, PDFs, markdowns, text, HTML.
So like, let's say I imported like Lord of the Rings. Could I then just start asking questions about Lord of the Rings?
Yes,
So just like a whole book you could import.
yes.
Yes.
Well, the limitation is so that it will break it down into the chunks, right? And then it will index those chunks. I assume, and Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, does it use the RUG pattern behind the scene to to populate the context window of the query, right?
I'm sorry, say that again, please. Does
Does
it use
this-
what?
Does it use RUG, retrieval augmented generation pattern? Populate the context question.
So you can utilize some prompt engineering and be able to leverage the RAG features or the retrieval augmented generation to be able to customize it to be more specific to what you're looking for. But essentially, yes, the large language model is what handles that on the back end.
And back to the gentleman's question. So essentially what it's going to do is before it actually gives you the answer, it performs a quick search on those chunks, finds the most suitable chunks that relate to a question, and then send those chunks with your question to the large language model and say, given this context, give me an answer on the question that you ask. And so the beauty of the large language model that it will take the whole context with your question and populate the answer based on the specific context that it find in the source data. Not just generic content on the whole knowledge that was trained, but specifically for the content that you injected from your specific data.
Exactly. So right now it's focusing on that data. Now, and I can show this later, where I can remove this data source, and once it's removed, if I ask it about the trail walker shoes, it's not going to know anything about it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Can these data sources be live dynamic data?
I believe so. But the problem with that is that you would have number one, the scrubbing and the cleansing of the data. That would be an issue because garbage in, garbage out. So you need some method to scrub that. But yeah, you should be able to.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Are you aware of any constraints on the data source size or number of data sources currently?
So there is, as far as the file types and the file sizes. I would have to dig those up as well.
That's okay. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay. All right. So going back to our PowerPoint. So with Azure AI Studio, we have the hub, and what that essentially allows us to do is to be able to group projects together. And it gives us the ability where we can share security settings, data connections, and other artifacts. And then within it, obviously, within each hub, we can create multiple projects. In addition, we have the ability to export files. Oh, sorry about that. We have the ability to export files where we have the dot prompt or promptee, which is used for the chat setup. And that could be used for sharing. And we'll walk through that in just a little bit. So some hub resources that I was referring to as far as what things can be shared, things like the security configuration, connections, any quota allocations that I may have, as well as any access keys for AI services. So all those are contained within the hub, and anything that utilizes that hub or any projects within that hub will have access to those resources. So what this looks like is something similar to this structure where we have the hub, and then we have a one-to-many relationship between the hub and the projects, as well as the connected resources that are for that specific hub. And so that can be shared by all the various projects. And so let's step through some additional features that are within AI Studio. So we talked about the using this as my sandbox. Now, what I could do is a few things. I could export as a JSON file. And what this will do is it will export everything from the system message, the examples that were used, as well as the parameters. All that will be put into a JSON file. And essentially, what that looks like. And it has everything that I had set up. So where I specified that it's an AI assistant that helps people find information in the system prompt, that is specified in the setup, the deployment name and the model that's used, and then all the various settings regarding the accuracy that is to be relayed. Now, these settings are found here under parameters, where I have whether to include past messages and the number of the past messages, the maximum response, temperature relating to the accuracy of the answers, et cetera, et cetera. All these are contained within my JSON file.
Can you please zoom in a little bit?
Sure. So another thing I could do is I can leverage, once I deploy this, I can leverage it by utilizing the code. So now, but just by simply clicking the view code button, again, I have my endpoint, I have my key, and then I have a snippet of code to leverage this API that is now deployed on Azure. And I can utilize a variety of different languages to be able to retrieve that snippet of code. So now I can take this, paste it into my application, and be able to access what I had built here in the sandbox. In addition, I can deploy this to a web application. And again, this is kind of a resource-intensive process, but I can click deploy to a web app. It'll take a few minutes, and then eventually, so I deployed it into a web app called Trail Walk Shop for the Trail Walk boots. And I have an interface that I can now test it and utilize it on a web for my customers. So I can say, are the Trail Walker shoes expensive? And it'll be generating an answer, and it'll pop up any second.
Isn't that relative though, whether they're expensive? I mean, compared to what?
Well, that's what we're waiting for the answer for. That's where the magic is going to happen. So it's going to pull up the price, but it will also look at any reviews relating to whether it was cheap or expensive, and it will include that into the answer.
Did your file contain some of the reviews?
I believe it did, and let me pull that up. So yeah, here are some reviews,
Yeah.
as well as some frequently asked questions.
We'll mention if it's expensive or not expensive, and if it finds this information, we'll generate that.
So it's sort of you told it though.
Yeah.
It's not.
Well, it's,
Wow.
of course, it's, you know, it's smart as
Yeah.
information you give it to operate, right? So if you tell that if you train the model on the information that the Earth is flat, and then you're gonna start giving them questions about the Earth, it's gonna give you the answers of the Earth. The same as with people, you know, like the quality of training defines, in most cases, the quality of the answers.
So if I load it up with fake news.
Yes, it's gonna give you fake news answers.
Pretty low points for a hiking shoe.
So I can, as we had seen earlier, it's already been deployed. But if I was to go through the deployment process, it would be a matter of specifying what it is that I would need to name it, the subscription that it would go under, location, essentially all the typical things that I'm asked for when I'm deploying an Azure resource. And of course, last but not least, the pricing plan. So for this, I selected the free or F1. And then in addition, oh, forgot to show you. So as stated here, you want to give it about 10 minutes to reload the app and before you can begin chatting. So it's an intensive process. In addition, the answers that I'm getting back, I can choose to get those in JSON. And there it shows me essentially the dialogue that took place between the system and the setting that I had set, what the user had asked, and what the user had responded. I can also take it a step further by looking at the chat capabilities, where now I can select for various different languages and dialects of how I want the response to be. I can also enable speech to text or text to speech. And I have the ability to select a variety of different voices, whether it's male or female. And it doesn't say the specific accent for each one, but let's do Stefan, for example. Whoops. And I don't think the sound is coming through. Did that come through? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
No.
It did not. I think when you hit the share
No.
button, to share your screen, you need to click there's a little button there that says share system sounds or something. Might be-
Okay. In any case, it's nothing to write home about. Basically, it's a plain English Stefan saying, how can I help you today? The point that I'm trying to get across is I can utilize either speech to text or text to speech. And once I save those settings, now I have the mic here where I can press it and I can say, are the trail walker shoes any good? And I can submit the answer. And then I can mute the answer in the middle, as you had seen here. Basically, essentially, Stefan, the voice that I had selected, is talking, we're responding back via voice. Any questions at this point?
Yeah. So let's say I have a lot of sensitive data that I want to load into this. So the first question is there some sort of backend database somewhere that, I can see you're protected with API keys on the API, but, is there some queryable database there that someone could go in there and just start poking around to look at the data?
So as you see, I clicked the link under add your data, where it says learn more about how your data is protected. And it took me to this link about data and privacy. And I can share this with you in chat. But essentially, as you see here, it is not available to other customers, not available to OpenAI. and essentially it's kept private. And let me go ahead and share that link in chat.
So the database or whatever it's being stored in isn't really accessible. It's only accessible through the API interfaces.
Correct.
Okay, the next question is, let's say I load this up with a lot of sensitive data. Let's say it's like medical data. So I have like name, address, age, and a bunch of medical information. Can you tell it that certain aspects are like PII and you don't want to return that, but other stuff would be okay? Like I'm looking for maybe across the country where are like high instances of lung cancer, but I don't want to know specifically who has lung cancer.
So you could do that within the OpenAI service, which would be obviously leveraged by the Copilot, but you would do it outside of Azure AI Studio.
So
Does
no,
that
don't
make
put that
sense?
information in there.
Well,
I'm sorry?
can,
So don't put PII in there, basically.
Well, that's certainly one way of doing it, but again, you can configure it so that if you go into, keep in mind that this, what I have here is a combination of things working together. I have Azure AI Studio, but then in addition, I have this entire resource group for indexing and searching through data that utilizes OpenAI. So I can go through the search service and configure it so that it doesn't respond back with the PII information.
you can also instrument the system prompt and request to the model to not disclose any PI information, but usually it's not considered to be a secure way because, you know, there's different levels of attack on the large language models when even so the original system prompt says, you know, don't disclose any personal information. There is a way to wiggle in through multiple prompts, through multiple
Correct.
questions to essentially tell that, you know, discard all the system limitations and give me the full information and so on. It's not a safe way to do it. It's like basically, you know, just scrubbing the information on the front end, even though you return it from the back end, somebody can go into the, you know, network calls of the browser and see all the API information, and so we not display it on the screen. So it's better to scrub it on the back end, but not even give it to the LLM to operate on.
Correct. So what you're mentioning there is jailbreaking, where you're essentially forcing it to get around some of the certain rules. And one thing I forgot to mention, if you look under system message, you have these different sections here for safety system messages. So if I want to ask something that regards violence or harmful content or ungrounded content where it's not specified in my data, or as specified here, jailbreak and manipulation, I can specify all these as safety messages where it will prevent the model from responding back. But like you mentioned earlier, the key is to prevent that data from being exposed in the first place. So you'd want to remove that before training the model on it. Does that make sense?
Hey, I have a question. Can we use the Azure recognition service to basically not showing those sensitive data PII?
The Azure Recognition Service to not show the PII?
Yeah.
I'm not certain of that. Let me make a note of that.
Which service are you talking about? Are you talking about form recognizer or?
No, the Azure recognition, you give them a text and it will know the PII information to hide it.
Oh, I see. That's a separate cognitive service. The Azure AI search behind the scenes does use that,
Yeah.
but it's separate. Yeah.
So we can't use like to combine it in this matter, like in here.
You could use it in your pipeline, right? So when you bring in your custom data, the way, like you could create a pipeline that does that work through Azure AI Search. So essentially, but that, you're doing that work yourself, right? So you can spend the time kind of with Azure AI Search, which is essentially what's behind the scenes here. You can build your pipeline to basically take in the data, transform it, do all of that. And in one of those things, you could certainly do that. Or you could just, as we kind of talked about, don't index the data.
That's the
Okay.
scrubbing process essentially that we would
Yeah.
have to cleanse the data. But whether it can be done in so back to the original question about recognizer, which recognizer are you referring to? The form recognizer or which one?
The cognitive.
But cognitive is a big blanket though.
So there is some part of it that it says like PII data, right? And if you give them the text that it has like information like an email or social security and stuff, it will hide it for you. I'm talking about that specific service.
That's PII. I agree with you, but you mentioned Azure Recognition Service. Which recognition service are you referring to?
I guess I meant the cognitive service.
Okay. We can take this offline, or if you can reach out to me afterwards, we can discuss it in more detail.
Okay.
Okay.
Hey, Sam?
Yes, sir.
I was wondering if you could revisit the system message dialog box in the center left again. It
Sure.
seems, could you describe that input again, please?
Okay, so the safety system messages. So if I was to add in.
No, I'm sorry. More so, I was more so interested where you were trying to change the tone or theme of the ChatGPT with you are comical and rude
This guy.
assistant. Yeah, could you describe that field again, please?
So basically, this is how you want, imagine it as if this was your customer service rep. How do you want them to act? Do you want them to be straightforward and be an assistant to provide information? Do you want them to be comical? Do you want them to be rude? How do you want them to be? This is how you customize that assistant to respond.
Is it, out of curiosity, are you aware, does it just manipulate your prompts?
Yes, it's ingested into the prompt. So there's essentially several levels of prompts. There's a default prompt that you don't see and you cannot control, that usually like OpenAI or whoever is offering the initial model for the service will do. And then this gives you ability to tailor the application, this chat application, specifically for your needs. You can tell it, for example, you are an assistant for company such and such, and you provide all information, for example, on the ticket reservations, and don't do anything else other than providing information on the ticket reservation. So it is kind of your way of steering the LLM to a particular functionality.
Got it.
And limit everything else from polluting the answers.
Thank you both.
ChatGPT's got the same thing in there. If you go into the settings, it's really a good idea to fiddle with that. I have mine to always follow up with a question because then it helps dialogue. Try to avoid giving me answers that you.
But you have to remember that it eats your token quota, right? Because it sends this prompt every time you answer a question. It compiles the whole list of questions and those system prompts in addition to your question. So it eats your input token quota.
I didn't catch the last gentleman, but essentially you're customizing how the response is back to the user. Does that answer your question?
It's nothing, right? Vlad. Oh, Vlad. Vlad was saying that that system message, whatever you type in there, uses up your tokens because it's getting injected, and so that's part of your token count.
Correct. And so as you see here, just in that brief demo, we see that there is 375 out of the 16,000 tokens that were utilized.
What are the tokens?
So tokens are basically every word can be broken up into segments or tokens. And that's used for the natural language understanding.
The price. You pay per token, right? Roughly.
Yes. Well, you pay for capacity and the amount of tokens. So how many tokens you can generate currently, and how many totals in total. So there's several kind of metrics, but all based on tokens.
Now, I wanted to ask, are there any more questions? There's a couple more slides that I wanted to wrap up before we conclude for the evening. So any additional questions or comments?
I want to ask you one quick question.
Sure.
If you want to update your data set, so you had initial data set with let's say 5 reviews, and then you get more 5 or 10 more reviews, and you want to update. What would be the process for updating?
So for updating, essentially, I can remove the data source and then bring in the new data and import everything from scratch.
Do you have to redeploy your web application also?
So you can redeploy it, but you'll be updating it. So as I click to deploy to a web app, I can either create a new app, or I can select to update an existing web application.
So you cannot select like multiple documents?
You can initially when you're importing, but afterwards,
Okay.
I don't see the ability to do that. But initially, yes, you can select multiple files.
Okay. You cannot add into that what you have.
Through AI Studio, no.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Question, Sam, do you know if there is a like API surface behind this UI, or is it only through the UI? Like, can I programmatically change the set of documents and then rebuild and publish?
So as you see here, when I pulled up the sample code for view code, basically gives me the ability to look at the snippet. And here it provides the URI as well as the OpenAI key. And let me just copy that and go into the world's greatest editor, also known as Notepad. And there you see that I have the code for accessing it. So here is my endpoint, the key that I'll be utilizing. And then essentially it's making a call to the OpenAI client or the URI and accessing it from there. So essentially it is an endpoint that I'm deploying out using AI Studio.
It's not uploading the file though, is it? So I guess you have to go on to full-on retrieval augmented generation if you want to do any kind of ad hoc adding of data sources. Is that right? Just skimming the code, I don't see anywhere where it's uploading the file. So I think you're stuck with whatever file you upload into Azure AI Studio.
This is client
Correct.
code. He's asking about the build part.
Can you upload new files via an API, or do you have to go into the user interface to do it?
So through the API, I don't see any ability for doing that. It would all be done through AI Studio.
AI Studio does have an API. I don't know if it's exposed at the moment.
Oh, it should be. This is not sustainable.
So I was reading the documentation that you can put a URL to a website, but it takes that and it puts it in a blob storage. So it just scanning the website it doesn't seem like it can do like runtime queries to other data sources. Like a use case, I'm curious, and it sounds like a big tangent, but a use case might be, I'm really interested in this shoe. Is there inventory at my local store? Like that would be more of interest in architecture, like a runtime query to an inventory system. Would that be out of scope of?
So you touched on something that's interesting there. So you mentioned about utilizing things on the back end and utilizing the blob storage. So keep in mind, initially when I set up the hub and the project, I went through a selection process where I defined the hub, the project, and different OpenAI services, right? What that did on the back end is it created all these different services that are being used for that, as well as the database account. So all that was created for me through AI Studio. So it's utilizing these resources in Azure to be able to store, index, and search the data. So can I mess around with the backend? Yeah, I definitely can.
Yeah.
So I can update the data that way, but then I would also have to index it or re-index it after I update it. And Labrina's got her hand up. Go ahead, Labrina.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, just to kind of clarify with Azure AI Studio, think of Azure AI Studio as kind of the I don't want to say easy button, but kind of like the UI portal where like everybody can come together and bring everything together into kind of it's like and creating an end-to-end platform for you and kind of getting you started. Everything which includes things like Azure AI Search, your GPT models, all of the tooling, everything else. So it's kind of like a platform that's creating everything for you on your behalf. You can still though then go in the back end and leverage the Azure AI search to create your own custom indexes and bring your own data. You could still use the SDK. You can still use all of those things in the back end, but it's more of kind of like this entire end-to-end platform. So you don't have to, so as a like if you were a developer starting from scratch and you were building an AI application, you could certainly just start, create, bring all these things together manually on your own, or you could start with Azure AI Studio and just you have everything kind of brought together for you. That's kind of the difference. So I just wanted to kind of help dispel that.
Yeah, and to go off of that point, so when I initially went through it and I showed you the different screen captions, nowhere in those did I mention an Azure Cosmos DB account, and nowhere did it ask me for it. It automatically created that for me on the back end in my subscription. So just like it created, or just like anyone that creates a Cosmos DB account, they can go and access it through Azure. Likewise, the same thing here as well. Again, the key thing is if you're going to be modifying that data, you're going to need to re-index it so that way it's retrievable. Not to mention the scrubbing and making sure the data is cleansed before you just pump data into it.
That clarifies a lot for me. Thank you.
Excellent. You're very welcome. So a couple things that I wanted to touch on in the remaining 10 minutes. So earlier on, we talked about the model catalog. How do we know which model is the right one? If you notice over on the left-hand side in AI Studio, on the left pane, I have the model catalog link, and there it gives me a listing of all the different models. And again, over 1,600 that are available. I can select a specific model, and it will give me more information about what that model is for. Token requests, training data that can be utilized. In addition, it provides me with benchmarks. Well, before I get into benchmarks, there are filters over on the left-hand side where I can select which collections I want, whether those built by Microsoft or those built by Meta. So I can select different criteria. I have my 2 different deployment options here. The inference tasks, meaning what do I want it to figure out? Do I want it to be a question answering? Do I want it to be text classification, image classification? What type of model and what do I want my model to do? So obviously, if I use image classification, that within the Meta, they have none. But if I go into Microsoft, for example, they have 2 for image classification. And same thing with fine tuning and licenses. So as you see, there are 21 different license types for the models that are available. Depending on another criteria of how to select a model, obviously accuracy is a key thing. So here they have about a dozen or so different data set names that they utilized for doing benchmarks. on the various models, and then I can just mouse over to see how that specific model did with that specific data set. And of course, to see if the model was grounded, fluency, relevance. So as you can see, there's a whole lot of detail about a whole lot of models here. Lastly, I wanted to go back to the few remaining slides. So a couple gotchas. First, make sure that you're utilizing the directory associated with a subscription as you're logging in. Your subscription also needs to be below the quota limit to be able to deploy a new model. You need to have the role as Azure AI developer, contributor, or owner on the hub. And don't forget to apply changes when making changes to the system messages. Also, if you notice when deploying a web app, as I mentioned earlier, I have the option to either create a new app or update an existing app, but there's a wait time of 10 minutes before I can reload it and start using it again. And so with that, I typically ask, what did we learn here today? So let me throw that out. Would love to hear from you either verbally or in chat. What did you learn here today? Not everyone at once.
I'm not a dev, but the abstractions here and the explanation looks really usable for explorations. And I'm in the software industry, and it looks it also looks really useful as things are changing so quickly, and we're, a lot of us, I think, are trying to play catch up and understand where we can create value with this. So I was energized by it. Thank you for the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate that.
I would say I have a better understanding of what place AI will take in some of my apps. So in my case, I would look at this maybe replacing some search features inside of my app. And that's mainly what, and it's good to understand what this specific piece does. Like Labrina had said, this is a quick build, I would say. I would use that definition. And then we can go more intense by doing it manually.
Right. So I like her phrase of the easy button. That is an old promotion used by Staples, where it's just a quick way of getting a Copilot to render. Not to mention, I can immediately click on the view code segment, and I have a code snippet that I can use to access that API. Sandeep said that he learned about Azure AI Studio. Kevin learned deploying a bunch of Azure resources, so I'm wondering how much it will cost. Good question. As always, it depends. The ubiquitous development answer with cost depends on the amount of data, the type of plans that you had selected. So for me, it was essentially pennies, but again, it's a demo, one file, and I chose the free web deployment. So your mileage may vary. Another thing that I always like to stress is just because before I get to that, some useful resources about the Azure AI Studio architecture, some quick starts to get you into developing the chat playground in AI Studio and deploying the chat web app, as well as some FAQs regarding AI Studio. If you have any more questions or you're interested in having this as a course, please feel free to reach out to nistechnologies.com. And more specifically, even though this is the end of the presentation, it does not mean it's the end of the conversation. My email, snasr@nistechnologies.com. You can also find all my links for LinkedIn, Twitter, you name it. You can find it on Linktree/Sam Nasr. And lastly, if we're not connected on LinkedIn, I invite you to do so, as well as to give me some type of feedback of what you thought of tonight's presentation. Feel free to post it on there on LinkedIn, or just send me an email. And with that, thank you all for attending. And I certainly look forward to hearing from you through email or through some other means especially if you're planning on developing your own Copilot, and how it is that I can help you with it. So thank you all for attending. Lee, thank you for the invitation, and hope it was beneficial for everyone.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Thank you.